Okay, so now on to part four of our survey of the different types of fingerprint patterns and how to identify them. We're now going to look at the variant fingerprint patterns that can be found in the hand. Um, there are quite a few little varieties in these, but all these different patterns only together comprise less than 1% of all fingerprint patterns. um, Newton loops, lateral pocket loops, composites and accidentals, and then some rather strange anomalous patterns which go by the name of ridges off the end, and also certain kinds of dissociation or dysplasia in the dermatoglyphics as well. So let's have a look at these slightly strange variations. The first one I want to look at is the Newton loop, and the Newton loop is obviously a kind of loop. And the loop pattern, as we know, has a triradius on the side like that. Um, but what you'll notice about this particular formation of the loop is instead of it going up, the loop actually is either going quite horizontally, as the case here, or, as in this case, is kind of rising up and then falling down like that. So the loop pattern is present, but it's not in the usual form. And you can see the two live examples from the prints on the right as well. The falling loop. So sometimes it is called a falling loop, but what it really, the best word is, and the forensic name is Newton loop. So it's a loop that lies more horizontally on the hand, um, rather than going upwards. So, and it can be in either a radial Newton loop or it can be an ulnar Newton loop. Um, Funnily enough, these are not recorded separately in the Scotland Yard statistics, but Lambourne 1983 reports that this pattern occurs in about 0.8%, 86% of male fingerprint patterns. So it's relatively uncommon, less than 1%. Um, but you don't come across them very often. They are, I mean, they're quite exciting when you do find them. Malcolm X, the famous black activist from the 1960s, actually had two of them, which I'm sure is very significant. Okay, moving on then, the lateral pocket loop. Well, the lateral pocket loop is a very strange formation when you see, you think, what's going on here? What is going on here? Well, what is going on here is we have two loops. So it's a kind of two loop formation. So funnily enough, we get two triradii, one there and one there. But it's not a whirl. It's definitely not a whirl. It's two loops. And of course, when you get a loop, you have a triradius. So if you've got two loops, there will be two triradii. And so this is exactly what it is. Basically it's a loop with another little loop underneath it. You can see that little loop going on down there like that, and a loop going up and over the top like that. So there's two loops here. It's a two looped pattern, but it's different from a double loop or a twin loop because in a lateral pocket loop, both the loops are going in the same direction, whereas in a double loop, the loops are going in opposite directions, which is why they look like a yin yang sign. This is also an incredibly rare pattern, only found on 0.154% of fingerprint patterns. So less than 0.2% of fingerprint patterns have a lateral pocket loop. So it's quite a treasure when you actually come across one of these and add it to your collection. I've only found it a few times in my life, but they're very distinctive when you see them. The next pattern is what we call a composite pattern. And well, the forensic term composite pattern is a kind of catch-all phrase, really. If you look at this pattern, it's kind of like sort of distorted worlds or messy worlds. I mean, it's quite obvious that there's a triradius here and another triradius there. And so that is pretty much a uh, well, except it's got another kind of tri-radius formation going on in here as well. And so that's what you get with these composites is you often get three or more triradii going on in the pattern. And so it starts taking on these kind of distorted forms, rather like um, rocks that are being crushed in tectonic plates and movement and up shoots of on cliff faces. Sometimes you see that kind of thing. So then they're not very specific in their shape and style. They can be formed in all sorts of kind of ways, but they are probably more like anything, they're probably more like worlds than anything else. And if you counted them as a world, that would be fair, I guess. But if someone does have this fingerprint pattern, you can certainly tell them that they should be very careful about where they leave their fingerprint patterns because these are so rare. 0.162% of fingerprint patterns and immediately distinctive. They're quite characteristic and as for the lateral pocket loops, not something that you come across very often. Um, so that's another particularly unusual fingerprint pattern. Um, and then lastly, we have what they are classified in the forensic uh, domestic living world as accidentals, which kind of looks like a sort of a whirl in an arch, really. But if it's got a whirl, if it's got a spiral, well then it's got a triradius, so it's not an arch, so it can't be an arch. It's got this one's got two triradii, you can see clearly. So these are kind of like um, not quite fully formed whirls, I think will be a good way of putting them. But they have more of a spirally shape than anything else. So I think it's probably fair to approach these as variant whirls as well, but they are classified separately by Scotland Yard and they are found in only 0.046% of fingerprints. So again, an incredibly rare fingerprint pattern. And I don't think I've ever actually seen one of these on a real live hand. So not expecting to see one soon either. So as you can see, these different shapes, fingerprint patterns are really quite rare. Um, 0.86% for the Newton loop, 0.154 for the and 0.162 for the composites, and 0.1046 for the accidentals. So these are really quite rare and unusual fingerprint patterns. Sometimes there are patterns that are unclassifiable. Um, there are various conditions called like dermatoglyphic dysplasia, which is kind of like the fingerprint patterns didn't actually properly form, and so they kind of leave this kind of strange markings in the ridges, or don't even form at all. With this kind of dissociation of the ridges, they're not coherent as ridges at all. These are extremely unusual, and the examples I've got here from Sharman and Alter's book are basically indications of fingerprint patterns that you find in chromosomal disorders and other conditions which are really quite severe. So they probably point to some genetic disorder, but non-specific. But just to show you that it is actually possible to have a fingerprint pattern that isn't classifiable at all, however rare that may be. And there is also a very strange phenomena of fingerprint patterns, which again is extraordinarily rare and known to have a genetic basis. And that is a condition that has been called ridges off the end syndrome, which is a kind of strange name for it, really. Or sometimes called, these are described as extremely tall tented arches. As you can see with this particular print here, you've got the ridge going all the way up there like that. Um, and so they have this kind of central tent that is really pronounced in that kind of way. But what's distinctive about these is the fact that the ridges don't curve around. In just about everybody else's fingerprints, you find that the ridges do this. They curve around at the top of the uh, of the finger itself. But all of these ridges, as you can see, they're just running off the end of the finger. Hence, this is called ridges off the end syndrome. Really, really unusual fingerprint pattern. Um, I've only had one example of it, which is this person here, in my whole experience of reading hands. And I wouldn't expect to see anybody else with that. TJ David, who did the research work on this in the early 1970s, found examples of it within the family. And so that he would just prove the point that it was genetically connected, indicated phenomena. But in this particular case with this woman, I knew her personally and I knew her family, and there were no other members of her family that we could trace that had this particular dermatoglyphic anomaly. So if you ever find ridges off the end syndrome, know that you found a very, very peculiar and unusual fingerprint pattern indeed. All right, so that compasses the anomalies within the fingerprints uh, that we can find that take up the last 1%. We'll be back for some more in a moment.